I want to talk about the Flyers core, or lack thereof. So, everybody's always talking about the core. Let's shake the core. I despise that saying. Quite frankly, I don't even know what people are talking about because this team hasn't had a core in some time. A core is a collection of players, not 2-3 guys that you want to pick on during the year because you nominated them responsible. That's not the way this works. And I hear a ton of people talking about it, fans, writers, all of it. I've never seen any evidence of any of this stuff. Outside of pointing at the captains and yelling at them because they have letters on their chests, and making them responsible for the way the team is playing. I've never seen anything resembling a core that people are actually talking about. But I do believe I understand what they're trying to reference, but they just define it incorrectly. There is essentially a recipe to a winning team. It's not definite, and there are variations of it, but everybody knows kind of the basic layout of that. It's the need for a number one center, the need for a number one defenseman, and the need for a number one goaltender. If you have the three of those, you can be considered a championship caliber team. Now that is a pretty surface level answer because quite frankly that is untrue. There are plenty of examples of teams that have this and do not win a championship. So we know that that's not true. Quite frankly, you are required to have all of your team be good to be a championship team. But if we want to define a championship caliber team, or at least a highly competitive team, there are key positions that under the cap era today, you can look to define as early as possible within your organization. And if those are nailed down, probably sustainable to be a competitive team. Try to pull off what Chicago did, what Pittsburgh did, right? Where you kind of rotate new players in, sometimes younger, sometimes veteran, but you always kind of have this core that everybody refers to kind of staying in position. The reason there is a core is because these are roles on the team, right? It's literally the way your team plays, but it's pretty much a generic number. We have this number from the expansion draft. If you look at the way the NHL broke it down, they are quite aware of it, right? You have the option where you can take kind of just a collection of 8 group of players and a goaltender, which the Flyers might opt to do for this expansion draft just because they really don't have a defined core, which is kind of my point here. If you do have a defined core, you typically go 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goaltender. The reason you want to do that, again, it encompasses the 3, the number 1 center, the number 1 defenseman, and the number 1 goaltender, right? You assume you have all 3 of those positions kind of locked down within this core. The core beyond that is you must have 4 very good wingers to be in your top 6, and that means guys who can play defensively and offensively and can play against the best players on the opposition's team every night. That is what that top 6 position means. It means you are clear-cut a point producer. That is the argument against Nolan Patrick, right? He was not producing at that clip. He was playing against those players, but he was not producing at that kind of a level. Essentially, the Flyers lack this, right? But you really just need those top 4 wingers, right, to complement your top 2 centers. Now that's 6 players. That other spot is reserved for your third line center. And yes, sure, you can have a Wayne Simmons playing on your third line and excelling and scoring goals. Or James Van Riemsdyk, right, scoring goals on the third line. But ultimately, that means your line falls short. You must have a center that is capable of playing a high defensive game. A game that he can play against the best players on the opposition if he has to. That is essentially a third line role. Right, it's a guy who could get elevated into a second line role at any point. He's probably one of your better PK guys on the team, right? This is typically what that role is designated for, and that's why it's so crucial. It touches so many aspects of your team's game. But it's obviously very difficult to hold on to everything on your team. So the reason I define it to 3 forwards and 3 centers, 4 wingers is because sustainably under the cap, you're going to be able to spend a good amount of money on those key positions. The other guys, left wing, right wing, third wingers, and your entire fourth line, those guys could all be either young players or rotated in guys on short-term contracts. And yeah, kind of hard to fill out your whole team that way, but that's why you draft, right? You want to bring in your players on the second and third line, not your top line, right? You don't want them playing on the top line. So maybe they bump down your second line winger because they're better, right, at a young age, and now you have a real top 9, right? But you got that guy on an ELC, so you don't have to worry about his contract. This is how it kind of works, right? You need to give diversity to the bottom lines to just kind of, don't hold on to these guys. It's tough to say because a lot of them are really good. Like even Michael Raffle, right? Like we held on to him, but we gave him a short-term contract again, right? Like he's not here permanently. If we had to move him at the trade deadline, we will, right? He's not a guy we have to hold on to. There's no commitment made there. A guy like Travis Konechny, yes. He's the second best right winger on the team. Clear cut. Guy like Voracek, already locked. Guy like Lindblom, he's going to get locked down too. Right? He's a very good player. He's already playing in the top 6. Is he a legit top 6? Maybe. But he'll probably get a bridge deal, right? He's not the type of guy who's going to get a 7-8 year contract like Ivan Provorov's going to get. Like maybe Travis Sanheim if they can get him locked up that long. They'll try to get somebody like Konechny on 6 years, 5 years, right? Long term, because these are guys you really see in these spots, okay? And I know people want to rip on Konechny. I'm sorry, he had 23 goals last year. These aren't low-level numbers for a small guy playing on a bad team. And we were a very bad team at times this year. Horrible. And he honestly had more bad luck this year than anything. I wouldn't have been surprised if he put up 30 goals this year. The kid is highly skilled, tons of energy, great skater. I have no interest in this kid going anywhere, and neither should anybody else. We have plenty of young kids who will be locked in on ELCs who probably won't even play these type of positions to command this type of money yet. This is what we want. We want to build a queue of players. So forwards, again, we lock that down, right? So next we'll go to the D. Now defense, I say 3, but obviously everybody knows that there is a top 4, right? It's pairings of defensemen. The reason I say 3 is because that 4th guy is a luxury. You very rarely see a team hold on to the 4th guy for very long. Sometimes a year, 2 years. I mean, we could look at almost any one of the teams, and they eventually have to move them, right? Nashville is trying to move PK because they recognize they have to move one of their defensemen, right? So eventually you have more kids coming in. You're supposed to be rotating talent, right? There's only 6 spots in a defensive position. You can't just hold on to it just for veteran guys. You need to rotate people in because under the cap today, odds are your number 1 D-man's going to demand a lot of money. Your number 2 D-man will demand a lot of money. If you look at the teams in the playoffs now, none of these guys have high contracts on there because it's killer, right? So you have to learn how to manage this stuff too. So again, that's why drafting is so important because you're going to lose one of your best players. It's just going to happen. So you have to be ready to nail down those 3 guys, those guys who will play your PK and your power plays, right? Usually you can slot in another forward or you can bring in a young guy to play on your second pair and power play depending on how your team plays. You want to leave that spot open. So 3 is a really reasonable number. Number leaves you to spend about $20 million, right, towards your D, just up front. And you'll probably need to do that for a number 1, a number 2, number 3. Most teams don't even have a number 1. So if you can even have 3 defensemen that you do not want to let go of, you got to make it happen. It was you can look at Arizona as an example, right? They went out to get Nicholas Hjalmarsson because they had Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and they have good young players, but they needed more. They need more balance. The Flyers have this problem right now where Sanheim just kind of took a step, right? You only had Provorov and Ghost. And then Sanheim finally took a step. And now you have Myers kind of sneaking in there. And mind you, all of these guys are kids. That is the problem with the scenario. Provorov is 21, right? Ghost 25. We're not talking about guys here who are, senior in the league and struggled and played against the best players every single year. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. They're not adults yet. Ghost is just coming into it now, going through his struggles. Watch him rebound. Even if he gets traded, I have no doubt that he will rebound and he will be an excellent puck-moving defenseman moving forward, which I believe he already is. And then we'll get to the goaltending, and obviously everybody has 2 goaltenders, and we've seen what happened with the Flyers this year. We had 8 goaltenders. Wasn't fun. Kind of tells you that, my theory here is wrong, but essentially you need a guy who can win games. They're hard to find. In my opinion, there's really only a handful of goalies that kind of separate themselves from the pack. The Flyers might have just drafted one. Or developed one, and it looks like we're getting lucky for the first time in a while, but there's a reason we're always scrambling to find one, because they don't have enough of them in the league. There's about half of the teams in the league who do not have a number 1 goaltender. So if you find him, you lock him into your core, and that is your core. Going through all of this again: 7 forwards, 2 top left wingers, 3 centers, 2 top right wingers, a top number 1 defenseman, a number 2 defenseman, and a number 3 defenseman. And they can be rotated on all 3 lines, or they can be stacked. It doesn't matter, but you need 3 of them. And then again, your goaltender, if you have a young one like we do, get insurance, which Fletcher plans on doing. But again, these are not core players, right? Brian Elliott and Cam Talbot, they're not core players moving forward. Even if they have a great year, they're just not. It will not be here long term. So they cannot be considered core. So that is your core. I believe that's what everybody is talking about. They are talking about this collection of players. It's about 11 players minimum to be a competitive team. So when you see people ripping the core, shaking the core, I would say look at the Flyers over the past several years, and you tell me what core has been around to shake. And I mean this honestly. What core? You have a group of young players surrounded by only now 3 real veterans, and Sean Couturier just turned into one, and I'm only really counting Giroux, Voracek, and JVR. Those are the only guys who are adults, full adults. Sean Couturier is just becoming one. Ghost is just becoming one. And everybody else is an average player. Wayne Simmons just left. Does that sound like enough? Great. This team doesn't have a core. It is undefined. It is unfinished. That is what Hextall was doing. That is what a rebuild is. Fletcher will continue that. So hopefully we have an awesome core to go into next season with, and the Flyers fill this core out in the offseason, or at least help support it with veteran players to supplement their youth. Follow me, Yariv Wolok, Wolok on all social media. Follow Philly Sports Network. Follow all of the writers for Philly Sports Network. We all write awesome content, and you should follow all of us because we all work together. So thanks.